Hi there, Scott. How are you? Thanks for joining the show. How's it going today?
Fabulous. Thanks for inviting me in, Alastair.
Great. Well, I would love to talk to you about platforms. We're seeing them at more and more firms. Tell me a little bit quickly about your history with platforms and where you think the trend is going.
Yeah, so I have actually a longer history with VC platform than actually being in a VC role. So all the way back in 2000, I was working for a marketing consultancy that was working for Axel Partners, and they were trying to decide whether or not to create a marketing group or a platform group at that point. And we actually convinced them to not move forward with it at that point. And it was pretty much because capital was scarce and all portfolio companies were really looking for was a few introductions to either customers or partners or things like that. And so you didn't need to make the investment. Well, obviously things have changed in the last 20 plus years. And I think that a lot of VC firms have recognized that they do put a lot of value add effort into, more than just providing companies with capital. And as the industry and technology startups have matured, there's this need to kind of operationalize the delivery of those value add services, right? Like investors always make introductions, they always help with strategic questions, things like that. But their primary job is to go find new investments and help grow them. So at a certain point, they need to help get other experts in to provide those value add. And so I think overall, we're seeing the industry move to more platform roles. Doesn't mean every VC firm needs a platform. It doesn't mean that every single one will have the same flavor of a platform. But I think in general, the entire industry is moving in this direction.
Well, that's a good point. I think platforms are well suited for some firms, and maybe some firms aren't ready for it. But haven't we seen data that firms that provide these type of services for the portfolio companies perform better? I mean, isn't that enough to convince more investors, more firm operators to go this route of adding a platform?
Yeah, I think you're talking about like the VC platform
Yep,
survey that was done that,
exactly a year ago. You're right, right.
yeah, tied firm performance with the existence of platform teams.
Exactly.
I would, I agree with that in principle, but it's also this question of like, is it the firms that have been successful who naturally went and created platform teams are having better results? So which is the beginning and the end to this situation? In general, I'd say, all VCs work hard to provide value to their companies. And I think it's those that have recognized they either have the opportunity to deliver more value or they want to put more emphasis on like growing the company and not just providing dumb capital, if you will, and walking away. I think those are the VC firms that see the better results because they're in there actively helping the companies, just not being a passive asset manager at that point.
Yeah, good point. What is it? The firm has achieved success and then they broaden their platform, or are they successful because they
Right.
provide value add services? Yeah.
It's the chicken and egg scenario. And I think one thing to call out is like, look, platform and VCs in general can be very helpful. But at the
Hmm.
end of the day, it's the startup, it's the founder, it's the team that's doing the lion's share of the work, right? So I don't want to say that like merely having the presence of a platform team will guarantee success, just like not having one. I won't necessarily say the startup is going to be a failure. I just think it's another resource then that the portfolio companies can tap into, another perspective, and it just helps overall.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's well put. That I'm not saying this. I don't think either of us are saying that every firm should have a platform, but it
Yeah.
is a resource that maybe many should be looking at
Yeah.
in this day. Yeah.
And I think it's, it gets to be this interesting balance, right? Because, and again, every firm is different. How they're going to approach platform is different. Some may actually be like an outsourced agency model where the portfolio company can come to you and say, hey, Scott, I want you to be the hands on marketer for the next quarter, or I want you to stand up a demand generation program, given my background as a CMO. But like most platform teams I'm aware of are more in the like advising space, like where they'll provide perspective, they'll provide resources, scaled playbooks, maybe do some hands-on keyboard work. But for the most part, they're there as an accelerant, not as an outsourced vendor. So actually, one of the challenges I've always seen in the platform role is when you have portfolio companies come and they're like, "Hey, I heard you're a marketer." In my case, you're going to be our marketing head. And it's like, no, I'm here to help and advise, and like I can help you think about who's the right person to hire in house, and I can help out in an emergency, but I'm not your outsourced, right? And I don't think any VC, well, again, this is my bias, but I don't think VC should be in the business of becoming a true service provider for their portfolio companies. And like, this is not a long-term solution. This is more of a helping you get moving, short-term, and kind of advisory role.
Very interesting. It makes me want to give you the floor here for a second. What are the characteristics of your platform there at Cervin?
Sure. So first of all, Cervin Ventures is an early stage B2B tech startup here in Silicon Valley. So we tend to invest in a lot of first-time technical founders who don't necessarily have as much experience with go-to-market activities. So our flavor of platform is going to have the traditional business and development, like introductions to customers and partners. We're doing lightweight recruiting and HR. So that means we're also making introductions to candidates. We're hosting a job board. We've got an executive recruiter network that we'll match make portfolio companies to. But the real bulk or differentiation of our go-to-market service is, given my background as a B2B CMO, I'm spending 50+% of my time consulting with the portfolio companies on various issues. And that may be everything from in fact, I got this message this morning. Hey, our demand gen efficiency has just fallen off the map. We don't know what's going on. Can you help us try to figure out what's happening there? All the way to, as I mentioned before, we tend to invest in those technical founders who don't have go-to-market experience. And they're saying, what does my first marketing hire need to look like? Or how do I set up my sales motion to make sure sales and marketing are actually working together? So that's where we're really going to focus. And I would say that every single firm needs to think about their differentiation for their platform. Some may focus on go-to-market. A lot of firms have traditionally focused on like the HR and recruiting side of things.
Talent side, yes.
Talent, right? And so, I mean, if you look at what portfolio companies tend to ask for and prioritize in the VC world, it almost always starts with introduce me to more customers, help me grow my revenue. So the business development function is typically the first thing that most platform teams start with. And then there's some aspect of talent, recruiting, HR, help me grow the organization and the people, find those key hires, those sorts of things. And then from there, it's kind of a long tail. It could be marketing, it could be product development, it could be sales expertise. But in terms of order of priority, it's almost always biz dev, talent, and then marketing or something else.
Professional development could be coaching.
And it could be, again, I think that's a great example of like where the HR and talent side, there are different flavors of that function. It could be pure recruiting. It could be more on professional development, employee comp. So there's no kind of cookie cutter, one size fits all. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the fact that VC firms are, they're partnerships. They're based off of the individuals and the people in that firm. And I think that it extends into the platform world in terms of, first of all, does the firm want to have a platform services team? And then when they make that decision, who do they hire? Right? So in Cervin's instance, when they hired me as a marketer, they were naturally like, well, this is something that a lot of our companies have been asking for. So why wouldn't we have you focus there? Right? Where other firms I know, again, talent has been the first thing that their companies have been asking for.
I'm thinking of the entrepreneur who may be tuning in right now. How can we help them out? What should they be looking for besides money? Because that's what venture firms have always been known for, the greenbacks.
Right.
But obviously, today's entrepreneur wants more than that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, existence of a platform team tells you a lot about that firm and tells you like where they're prioritizing their efforts and how they think that they can add incremental value, right? So I would, all things being equal, I would tend to lean towards firms that have some sort of formalized platform function over those that do not. But I will also say, the number one decision point for most entrepreneurs when they're taking money from a VC, beyond the actual capital and having money to fund the company, is the personal relationship with that investor who's doing the deal. Right. I still think that that's the critical decision point. And again, I think the presence of a broader platform team behind that investor just as a sweetener. Again, this is my bias. I don't believe that an entrepreneur should go to a VC firm just because of the platform team. But hey, if everything else is equal and suddenly you're going to have access to a whole expert network, why wouldn't you tap into that?
Relationships matter. I used to see it as a journalist. I see it now in my work with VC firms that, partners have relationships with entrepreneurs that go back years, or it's a second degree relationship. It factors in a lot to the decision making, I think, on both sides.
Yeah. I think relationships trumps all. Like, again, deal terms aside and everything like that, the relationship is what's really critical, because we've all got to remember this is like getting married. Right? You're going to be with this startup for 7 to 10 years, and you better like each other today, because 10 years from now, like, it's going to be, a different environment. But I do think, going to relationships, that's part of what the platform team extends, right? It means that it's not just the relationships of that individual investor. It's now you've got specialized relationships from somebody like who used to be a CMO or somebody who used to be a head of people. And they can make connections, and they just have kind of a different muscle memory for the issues that you as an entrepreneur are trying to solve. Versus, an investor may or may not have expertise in the area that you've got an issue, and they've probably seen this enough in their other companies that they can give you some generalized feedback. But, I just think, going back to like this notion of the note I got this morning with a demand gen program that's going sideways, like, if you ask my investors that, they're going to say, that's not good. We should find somebody to help, right? Versus, given my background, I'm able to say, okay, great. Let's set up a meeting, pull the reports, what's going on, and let's dig through this. And again, I may not be able to answer all of their issues, but I can point them in the right direction. And if we get to a point where I'm like, hey, this is beyond my ability, now let me call in the experts I know, and we'll get to the bottom of this.
Sounds like how it should operate. I want to talk a little bit about venture has long been a boutique style operation. And we both, I think, agree that it's become more operationalized. How is that? There's regulations. It's more formal. It's not the same venture business. It's grown. It's evolved. How is that impacting kind of what we're seeing with the growth in platforms?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And it's been really interesting, given I had that exposure to Excel back in 2000, and then I spent the most of my career in B2B marketing, but was always interested in venture and kind of saw the evolution that started really probably with like Andreessen Horowitz introducing the agency model back in the, I guess, mid 2000s. So I think the evolution candidly is happening across like private assets. Right. Where I think a lot of private asset investing used to be a lot more opaque, boutique, and just not well understood unless you were in the industry. And I think, going back to like private equity, I think really had to operationalize back in the, mid 2000s. Hedge funds after Bernie Madoff got a lot of scrutiny and kind of had to tighten things up. And so I'd say VCs in some ways, at least again, this is my opinion, are going through that similar transition today. Some of it may be regulatory with some of the new SEC rules. Some of it is just the requirements of the LPs saying, hey, we need to see how this is a repeatable process, not just that you are a brilliant mind who can, pick the one company that's going to become a unicorn, but like, show me that this is a repeatable, sustainable business that you're running or investment practice. And so especially today, I think after some of the excesses of the last 3 to 5 years, a lot of LPs are putting that pressure on VCs with the next fundraise saying, hey, show me how you're making the sausage and prove to me that you can do this repeatedly. And what I think is interesting about that is I think the platform role is both an accelerant of that, because the platform people tend to come in from the operating world, like the corporate functional expertise, and they're like, hey, this is how a corporation that's measured on profit and loss is run. We should do this a similar way. And I think the move to VC platform then is also an output of some of these pressures that VC firms are feeling. So it's like, I'm not sure if it's cart or horse, but either way, I think the rise of the platform role is helping the evolution of the VC to, I won't say it will ever not be a boutique business, but you're seeing more of a shift to a more institutionalized, operationalized environment.
I'm curious, back when you were consulting with Excel, did you call it platform?
No, no,
That's a more
no.
recent, yeah.
No, I think that, that term for me kind of came out of nowhere. So what's interesting is my journey with platform actually continued in 2017. We moved the family to London. I left Facebook. We moved to London for my wife's career. And I decided I was not going to be the brash American technology person and just assume I knew what I was doing. So I spent 6 months getting around and talking to all the European VCs, trying to figure out what startup I was going to land at. And in that process, what I found is especially the European VCs were just getting eviscerated by the American funds who were coming over and doing marketing and doing platform. And these European funds were like, what is this? Right? Because they were very used to kind of, again, the older style of I make the investment, I make some introductions, and I help you with your strategy and whatnot, but I'm not necessarily getting my hands dirty doing the day-to-day work. And so that was really interesting to me. And I ended up consulting with a couple of different firms over there and just helping them think through like what the initial steps were to develop platform. And then when I came back to the US a year later, that's when suddenly it seemed like platform was everywhere and it was an actual role and VCs were investing in it. So I'm not exactly sure if I just wasn't paying attention before or if this has always been kind of simmering in the background and suddenly somebody put a label on it and it kind of rationalized what everybody was doing. But that's when I've really started to see things accelerate.
Yeah. I think that's a fascinating observation with what was happening in Europe and the U.S. I mean, that could be a whole nother show, just diving into that. I was kind of curious, and listening to you talk about how you went there in 2018, and yeah, we started to see the label and platforms were taken off. It went from value add to platform. I was thinking too about how the pandemic kind of affected things. Virtual communications, what we're doing now has increased, and that's impacted a little bit how entrepreneurs pitch and how they meet and how VCs meet with founders, at least initially, and that. Am I barking up the wrong tree here, so to speak? Has the pandemic kind of and what we went through for a couple of years impacted the need for platforms and helping out entrepreneurs and how they operate and communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's impacted the need. I think the need has always existed. I think what has potentially changed is entrepreneurs' awareness or willingness to ask for that help. So interestingly enough, so I was at Sapphire Ventures when the COVID hit, and one thing, especially for marketing platform roles, there's really two kind of flavors. One is either marketing the firm and the founder or the GPs, if you will, like building the brand of the firm to increase deal flow and things like that, or you are focused on the portfolio companies and like helping them as an operator. And typically it's very difficult to do both just because it's a different mindset, different priorities, things like that. So Sapphire was very clear with me when I joined. They're like, hey, 90% of your job is you're marketing the firm and the partners, right? But halfway through my tenure there, all of a sudden COVID hit. And it was like, oh my gosh, we now have 60, 80 portfolio companies who are sucking wind. You got to get in there and see what you can do to help. And so overnight, my job pivoted and it went from, I remember there was one portfolio company I was helping that their entire demand gen strategy was built around physical in-person events. And they had to figure out how to stand up like digital demand gen and virtual events overnight. And they had no idea. Right. And so what's interesting about that for me is, there was clear direct value add there. And so now there was a bit of a community that developed amongst the CMOs who were I was connecting them and getting them all to work together and help each other out. And we were all learning quickly. And that just continued. Right. So to your point, like, would any one of those CMOs have thought to give me a call when they're like, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, and Z? Probably not. But very quickly, it turned into kind of, I won't say a crisis hotline, but it was, hey, now I know I've got somebody I can call who isn't in my direct line of communications or chain of command that I can bounce ideas around, get suggestions, and then make a decision myself. So I do think COVID kind of opened the aperture a little bit more to ask for that help. And that's actually one thing I still see now today is there are some entrepreneurs and some teams that just won't ask for help, even if we offer it. And so that's a personal choice. I don't know why you wouldn't ask your VCs for help, but there are some folks who just want to go it solo. Great.
Well, maybe after watching this, they'll think about it.
Maybe they'll return my calls. Yeah.
Yeah, if there's no other message from this, it's return Scott's calls. Yeah, return
No,
his
I have
emails.
no problems getting calls back, but it's more of a, because I do understand, there's a little bit, there can be some tension
Yeah,
of like, wait, why is my investors team offering to help? Like, are they trying to
any
get
interest?
more inside information on what's going on? Like, what are their motives? And, I would say from every platform person I've ever talked to, like, we're just here to help. Like, because if the portfolio companies are successful, we look great, the firm's returns get better, back to what we were talking about before, and we can all move forward and raise the next round, next fund, whatever it may be. So we have no ulterior motives.
So yeah, continuing on, but let's talk about kind of what we're seeing, and that is, and what you hear directly from people who reach out to you, who are either launching a platform at a VC firm, or maybe the flip side, people who are looking to change jobs and enjoying the operation of a platform. What are you seeing?
Well, in general, I think there's more awareness and interest in platform, both on the operator side and on the VC firm side. And what's interesting is I feel like I almost have like a cottage side business of like helping people think through whether they should join a firm or a firm should start a platform, because there is a bit of a herd mentality sometimes in VC, and folks are like, oh, everybody else has a platform. I need platform.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then they start searching for people. And that's generally where I sometimes get these calls. And my first question is like, well, why now? Like, what's the issue that you're trying to solve? And if they don't have a good reason except that everybody else has one, then, I really like caution them to like think through, like, what's your strategic intent here? Like, again, going back to what we were talking about before, it's like, what kind of value add are you going to deliver? Is it go to market? Is it technical? Like, it has to align with kind of the investment thesis or like how you're going to differentiate yourself as a firm. Otherwise, don't waste the money to hire a platform. And maybe you test the waters a little bit by bringing in expert networks or fractional executives or something to like really figure out what's going to work within the culture of your firm before you commit to it. And on the flip side, I get calls from operators, especially now, as there's been a lot of layoffs in Silicon Valley, who are like, VC looks so sexy and cool. I want to join a VC firm. What's it like? It's funny because my wife has heard me have this conversation with multiple people, and she's like, "Oh, you're always such a downer." And I'm like, I'm not. I'm not trying to steer people away from this. I just want them to go in with eyes wide open, because the VC lifestyle and everything else can appear very sexy, but the kind of rubric I always give people when I start these conversations is like, hey, realize that working for a VC shop is often like working for a small mom and pop business in terms of process and infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
that you're working for multiple CEOs of equal voting power, because you're in a partnership, you're not a corporation. So you've got to deal with everybody having a different opinion, and there's some sort of voting structure. And then there's a different economic model, so that like every dollar you spend as a platform person is a dollar out of the GP's pockets. So they're going to tend to want to do things on the cheap. So just go in with eyes wide open on that, because if you're rolling out of a Google, a Facebook, something like that, we've had amazing resources and great process, and all the data is clean all the time and things like that. You roll into a VC shop, it's a little bit more of the Wild West. And believe me, it can be amazing. And you get access to things and you see things and you get to do things that you never would in an operator role. But it's a very different environment, and not everybody can make that transition.
Are they testing the waters? Like, oh, maybe we'll just hire one person, or are you seeing them like jump full on into the deep end and just go big? Is it a mixture of both?
I almost always see they dip their toe in the water.
Yeah.
It's always, it could even be like I said, a fractional exec. They bring somebody on as almost like a operator in residence or an entrepreneur in residence, and they test the waters, and then they're like, "Hey, we're getting a lot of positive feedback here from the portfolio companies. Let's go ahead and invest in this more." But there is some tipping point, and again, I think every firm is different. But there's a tipping point where they've gone from ones and twos to all of a sudden like, hey, this makes a lot of sense. And they flip the switch and they really dramatically expand the platform. And again, dramatically, put air quotes around that, could be
Right.
just doubling it to 2 or 3 people, or it could be, some of the larger firms now they have 20, 30 people working in platform. I think circling back, you had mentioned the VC platform survey that was done a year ago. I think
Right.
one of the eye-opening stats for me out of that is that currently, I think it's like around 13% of all headcount at VC firms are now platform roles. And that's grown over the last like 20 years from about like, I think it was like 5%. So again, it's not a 50%. The focus is still on VCs are investors, and the majority of the team should be focused on the investing because that's the core function of the firm. But there is now at least a sizable portion of every firm, or most firms, I should say, that are focused on these value add platform roles.
Is it a community? Is it are you all supporting each other?
Yes, it's a tight community. And, I was very lucky. I had a few friends have venture marketing roles before I joined. And so I learned from them and I talked to them. And this was like pre-community. But I really entered into venture marketing in particular as these, like the VC platform group, or there's VC ComCons. There's a variety of different flavors of these platform groups. They really started to explode. And the thing that I was always amazed by and continue to be amazed by is because VC firms don't really compete, the platform teams are all very willing to share what's worked, what hasn't, what they've tried. I mean, every time I'm in a conversation with another platform person, it's like half therapy and half like talking about like what's worked, right? Because we're all facing similar challenges and we all are in a very similar situation. So people are very open to be like, well, here's what I tried. What did you do? And so there's a lot of best practices sharing and a lot of just general love and support.
Very good. Any insight into best practices that are going to be taking off?
And so what I would say, again, because I tend to focus more on the marketing side, the best practices I'm seeing on the VC side is they're beginning to adopt more and more of the traditional B2B marketing activities. And what I mean by that is I actually have peers in VC firms are actually starting to worry about things like SEO and the quality of their email mailing lists and email deliverability. And it's like stuff that as a marketer is just table stakes, is something that the VC firms are now starting to worry about. And I think the reason for that is as the platform teams become more prevalent, just having a platform person is not as much a differentiator anymore. Now it's, okay, how do I make sure that whatever we produce or whatever we do actually reaches the people that we wanted to? And that could be, again, existing portfolio companies, or you could be leaning into more like trying to use that as a way to increase your deal sourcing. I think that the biggest thing you can do if you're interested in this role is, first of all, just start talking to everybody you possibly can who's in a similar role and whatnot. But what I often find is that these roles are very relationship driven, as the rest of VC. So it's actually talking to the investors and understanding what they are looking for or the issues they're having in their portfolio companies so that you can see if it's a good fit for you to come in and help, right? This is not something that I think you're going to see advertised on LinkedIn and be able to apply for and roll right into, right? There's kind of a small cadre of executive recruiters who tend to specialize in not only like the investment side of VC, but also the platform roles. And if you can figure out who those people are, they've got a pretty good sense of, who's either hiring today or starting to think about platform.
The recruiters, oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, no, I was gonna say, and then on the don'ts side, it's, don't assume that VC is like a corporation. Like, do your due diligence. There's plenty of resources out there to like understand the economic model of VC firms, like how a fund works, how entrepreneurs decide what firm to go with. Like, you've got to really like steep yourself in it because it's a different buying decision than SaaS.
Hmm. And I've definitely have heard that from people who maybe went from an agency or a corporation to join a venture firm. Yeah, that's you got to ramp up and learn about how a fund operates.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's easy to do. You just, 10 hours a day for a couple of years and it'll all make sense.
Well,
So
I mean, I'm
yeah,
still learning, right? I've been
yeah,
in it for
exactly.
years now, and it's like every time it's like, oh my gosh. And that's what's exciting about it, right? Is first of all, you're getting exposure to a lot of portfolio companies, you're getting exposure to a lot of pitches, so you're seeing a lot of things. And then for me, coming out of 20 plus years in tech marketing into venture, it's like it's similar, but radically different at the same time.
Okay, so we covered some good advice for those seeking jobs in a platform. But let's end on this: the entrepreneur out there, the founder who is raising money, maybe an early stage round, let's say. What should they be looking for?
Well, first and foremost, I think again, I'd go back to kind of the marriage
Mhm.
analogy. Like
Yeah.
you're getting married to that investing partner and that firm for, hopefully a long-term good ride. So it's got to feel good from day one, and you've got to feel like they are in your corner and they're there to support you. What I worry about sometimes is entrepreneurs who get addicted to some of the free platform services that some VCs will give away to try to attract the deals. And they're just seeing, sometimes these entrepreneurs see it as very transactional of like, oh, you're going to give me 5 candidates for this key hire, or you're going to introduce me to these 5 customers. And they don't view it as much as a relationship building as a step forward. It's just like, oh, here's a checkbox. You're going to do this for me now, um, because you never want that to translate into the post investment side of things. Because, I don't necessarily want to go out of my way to help a CEO who just calls me up every week and berates me to introduce them to 5 more companies, right? But like somebody who's like really in it for the partnership and we can collaborate together to figure out how we can add value or where we can add value. I think that that's, again, it goes back to who do you want to get married to, and is this the right people for you? And you may not know that from day one, which is why it is good to engage not only the investing partner but the platform team and just really understand.
Hmm.
But again, like we were talking about before, I also see investors who don't leverage the platform team, and I think that that's a real miss, because if the firm has this asset and it's available to you, you should ask for help.
That's great advice. Well, this has been fun.
Been
Hopefully,
great.
I enjoyed it. Hopefully, you have. I think you have a lot of great insights there.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's always fun to share these kinds of learnings and everything, mostly because it has been an area that not a lot of people have seen exposure to, and it is still a relatively new thing. So
Yeah,
happy to share. Thank you for having me on.
it's still a relatively new thing. Yeah, like everything in
20
VC.
years later, it's still new.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey everyone, this is Alastair, and thanks for tuning in to the Venture Variety Show. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Scott Brown from Cervin Ventures. Next up, it's a blooper reel because, well, not everything runs smoothly in a podcast. So hope you enjoy it, and thanks again for tuning in to the Venture Variety Show. Until next time, bye-bye.
I just realized I wasn't recording. I can't believe this. I I thought it. I didn't want to
No
stop
worries.
you.
We can restart the whole thing. So what'd you think of that? Like, is that the kind of stuff you want to get into?
Yes, I think that was a great recap. I do. I should have stopped you when I saw. Oh wait, the light's not on.
All right.
You gave me permission and it wasn't automatic. I
There you go.
apologize.
Okay, so now I see a recording. All right, we can
So we
restart.
this is what kinks look like, boys and girls. Uh, we know what we're
I
doing
can't
here.
can't wait to see the blooper reel from this.
Hey, Scott, I didn't record any of that. Well, Sorry. Hey, take two. Okay.